Hello, Laverne here, and I'd like to thank you for joining me. May this video be a blessing to you and to your loved ones, and may it honor and may it glorify our Father and Creator in heaven. In this video, I'm going to be looking at and identifying who the great prostitute is that is described in the book of Revelation. To do this, I'm going to be using prophecy or looking at passages found in the Bible itself, but also looking at non-canonical writings that expand on or give us additional information about the great prostitute. There is a lot of information, necessary, essential information that is found in non-canonical writings. And these writings, this information helps us to clearly and without question identify who the great prostitute is. Now, before I get into the subject matter of identifying her, I'd like to first talk about the importance of prophecy and why it's important to understand the correct interpretation of it. Approximately 25%, some would even say 27% of all scripture is prophetic or predictive in nature. That is a large portion of scripture that is dedicated to prophecy. So for those Christians who think that prophecy and understanding it isn't important, well, just ask yourself, why would our Father, why would our Creator give us so much prophecy if it wasn't important, if it did not in some way affect our very salvation? To clearly bring this to the forefront and to make it so there's no question as to the importance of it, I'd like to speak to the Pharisees and Sadducees who failed to recognize Christ as the Messiah. Now, these were religious leaders who spent a lifetime studying the scriptures. These were people who were supposed to have a understanding of prophecy, to have a understanding. These were the authoritative figures when it came to the word of God. And yet they failed to recognize Yahushua HaMashiach. They failed to recognize the Messiah. And why? It is because they had a poor understanding of prophecy. They had it in their head, they had it in their mind that the Messiah would be someone like King David. This today is even taught in Judaism. One of the reasons that many Jews reject Christ as the Messiah today is because they believe the Messiah would not be doing the kinds of things that Christ did. That the Messiah is simply supposed to be a human who would do the things that King David was known for. The Messiah will be a great military and political leader, according to Judaism. And the reason they interpret prophecy this way is because they are lacking much of it. They are lacking much of the inspired word of our Father. And so they fall into serious error. And they today reject Christ, just as the Pharisees and Sadducees rejected him when he walked the earth. But the Essenes, the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, that religious sect, well, that's a different story altogether. They were looking for a Messiah that would do exactly as what Christ did. They were expecting a Messiah who would raise the dead. They were expecting a Messiah that would be able to control the elements, control the heavens and the earth. And not only were they expecting the Messiah to be able to do this, but his followers as well. There is a writing that some scholars call the Redemption and Resurrection Scroll that is part of the set of scrolls known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in this writing, there is a Messianic prophecy, and it states the things I just described. And what we see is that when John the Baptist sent his disciples to ask Yahushua if he was the one that they were waiting for, the response that Christ gave them was to cite this prophecy in the Redemption and Resurrection Scroll. Basically, Christ was telling them, I am the one that is prophesied in this writing. And so this is why there were some people who accepted him while many others rejected him. And it's why the Pharisees and Sadducees claimed that he was getting his power and his authority not from God, but rather from Satan. And the reason they made this claim is because they did not believe the Messiah would be doing the kinds of things that he did. And they believed this because of a poor interpretation of prophecy. While the same is going to be true for the end times, the same is going to be true for when the Antichrist, the beast, and the false prophet come on the scene. People are going to accept them. And I'm talking about believers. I'm talking about Christians. They are going to accept and follow the Antichrist, the beast, and the false prophet. And it will be because of a poor interpretation and a poor understanding of prophecy. Just think of all the different interpretations we have for the great prostitute and the beast today, and the mark of the beast, what it's going to be. Consider that there are those Christians who claim without any question, any doubt whatsoever, they know that Jerusalem is the great prostitute. They make this claim because Israel and Judah are both called prostitutes in the Old Testament. It is also said that Jerusalem sits on 7 hills. But these things are not enough for us to be able to claim we know who the prostitute is. The great prostitute, whoever we point to, must meet all of the criteria that we are given in the prophecy about her. There's a reason we are given so many characteristics for the great prostitute. And the reason is because there are many cities, many religions, many different things we can point to that will meet several of the criteria. I'm going to share with you 19 points, 19 characteristics or criteria that we are given about this great prostitute. 19 very specific descriptions of the great prostitute. And whoever I should say we point to must meet all of these points. All of the criteria must fit. And as much as possible, we must accept a literal interpretation when it is given. Unfortunately, many Christians will say that even when we are told something specific being literal, they will claim, no, it's talking about something else. And they allow their own imagination dictate who the prostitute is. There are those Christians who claim that the great prostitute represents any and all religion or faiths or beliefs that reject Christ as the Messiah. So any belief other than Christianity that fully accepts Christ as the Messiah, well, these are all part and parcel of the great prostitute. So they reject the idea of a specific city ruling over many peoples. They reject the idea of, specific colors representing the great prostitute. They reject so much, or they, instead of accepting it as it's given to us, they twist it in order to make it fit whatever conclusion they've come to. But we are told specifically that this woman sits on 7 hills or 7 mountains, and that she is a city. We're specifically told this prostitute, this great prostitute, is a city that sits on 7 mountains or 7 hills. This is a literal description. And so whoever we look to must be a literal city sitting on 7 hills. Well, there are those who point to Babylon as being the great prostitute, the literal city of Babylon. But understand that we are told that this is mystery Babylon. Therefore, if it was simply the literal city of Babylon, we would not be told that it's mystery Babylon. Then there's the fact that we find in Jeremiah that it tells us that after the Hebrews are taken into Babylon in exile, once Babylon is destroyed, it would never return to its former glory. This is why Babylon remains simply another city. It is nothing compared to, and never will be like the Babylon of old. Therefore, when we understand this writing in Jeremiah, we can know then that the literal city of Babylon will never be the kind of city that will ever be said to rule over many peoples. Therefore, the literal city of Babylon cannot be the great prostitute. And this then throws a wrench into the idea that the Antichrist is going to be coming from Islam, is going to be a Muslim, as so many Christians teach and believe. The city of Jerusalem, so many things about the description of the great prostitute simply does not fit with Jerusalem. We are told that this woman dresses in or wears the colors purple and scarlet. While Babylon is not known for this, Jerusalem is not known for this. Washington, as many people point to and claim is the great prostitute, is not known for the colors purple and scarlet. However, the Catholic Church and the Vatican is known for the colors purple and scarlet. So the colors purple and scarlet fit perfectly with the Catholic Church. The Vatican is said to sit on 7 hills. That is proper Rome. The writings of the Vatican, the Catholic Church's own writings, state that it sits on 7 hills. Therefore, we can see, at least with these few criteria, these few characteristics, that the Catholic Church seems to fit. Now, we are told that the woman is sitting on water as well, and that the waters that she sits on represent the many peoples, nations, and tongues that this woman rules over. Excuse me. Well, without question, without any doubt, the Catholic Church has ruled over many peoples and nations from this city that is the Vatican. From this city, the Catholic Church has ruled over many peoples and tongues and nations, and continues to do so today. The Catholic Church is responsible for making many kings around the globe. We are told that this person, or that this entity, is a woman. Well, Jerusalem, even though it is called a prostitute and is referred to as a woman, Israel is also referred to as a male. As you know, we have Judah and we have Israel, but it's also known as Jacob. The Catholic Church, on the other hand, is only ever known as a woman, as being the bride of Christ. We are told that this woman thinks of herself as a queen that can never be hurt, never be destroyed, that she has nothing to worry about as a queen. While the church considers itself to be the bride of Christ, which would make her a queen. The Catholic Church has long since believed it could never be destroyed, that it has the blessings of God. And because it has the blessing of God, because it's made up of the elect, then God will protect this bride, this woman, this Catholic Church. Well, this simply is not the case, but she thinks she is such. Consider the fact that the Catholic Church, or the church in general, is always thought of as being a woman. Consider also that we find in the non-canonical writing known as the Shepherd of Hermas, that the church is described both as a woman and as sitting on water. For Hermas sees this vision, and it's of this tower that, as it's described, we know it's talking about the church. And he asks an angel, why is it sitting on water? And he's told that it sits on the water because it is by the water that we are saved, through the waters of baptism. And so we have this description of the church actually sitting on water, as is the great prostitute described. The church is described in this vision, or I should say, Hermas has a number of visions He sees a woman as being very old, and then a little bit younger, and then younger still. And an angel asks him, why is this, or asks, who is this old woman? And Hermas, he doesn't know. And so he asks the angel to tell him. And the angel responds that this old woman that he was talking to is the church. Hermas asks, why then does she appear old? For according to Hermas, in his mind, the church was something new. While the angel responds that she appears old because she is the first of all creation. So understand the significance of this. We are told that the church was the first of all creation. This is why she appeared as an old woman in this vision. Now consider the fact that we find a description of the book of life and people being written into the book of life since before creation. While these two go hand in hand, what this means is that those people who have their names written in the book of life, that were written in that book since before creation, what this is talking about is the elect. It's talking about the church. So even from the time of Adam and Eve, the saints were part of the church. Anyone whose name is written in the book of life is a member of the elect, and they are part of the church. So this description of the church being a woman, of sitting on water, this all points to the great prostitute being the church. Now consider that we are told there are two women that are seen to be in the wilderness. There is a woman who is taken to the wilderness and protected for a time, times and half a time. This means she is only protected for a specific period of time, and then that protection is taken off. She is no longer protected after that period of time. Then we are told that the great prostitute is in the wilderness sitting on the scarlet beast. Well, I'd like to put to you that the two women being described are one and the same. The first that we hear of this woman being protected, well, this is talking about the church in its earliest stage. It is talking about the church being protected, spiritually protected, that is, protected against the lies of the devil for only a period of time. This then brings me to another description of a woman found in Revelation, and this is of a woman who the dragon tries to drown with the water that comes from his mouth. Well, I'd like to put to you that this woman is one and the same. These depictions, these descriptions of a woman are actually describing the very same woman. The woman that the dragon tries to drown with the water that comes from his mouth is the same woman that was protected for a period of time in the wilderness. And they are the same woman that sits upon the scarlet beast and who is the great prostitute. The church in its beginning stages was protected. And the water that flows from the dragon, I'd like to put to you that this is the lies that the dragon, who is Satan, tries to destroy the woman with. So understand that this has nothing to do with the world at large, but rather has to do with the church, who is the bride of Christ. The waters flowing from the mouth of the dragon are the lies that he tries to destroy the church with, tries to corrupt her with, tries to turn her into a great prostitute with. And he is successful in turning her into a great prostitute, into corrupting her. But he does not destroy her, for we are told that the woman is protected by the earth opening up and swallowing the water, which are the lies that flow from the dragon. So the woman is eventually protected, but for a time period, she grows and she becomes a great prostitute. This is the Catholic Church. It is that the largest church system in the world. She is the great prostitute. I'd also like to put to you that Jerusalem, who also sits on 7 hills, while she is not the great prostitute, she is the mother of the great prostitute. For it is from Israel that the church was birthed. So Israel, that was a prostitute, gave birth to the great prostitute, and that is the Catholic Church. Then we are told also that this great prostitute has many daughters, and that these daughters also are prostitutes. So who are these daughters? When you look at the idea of Babylon being a great prostitute, this does not fit. When you look at Jerusalem as ruling over many peoples, it doesn't fit. And having many daughters also does not fit with the city of Jerusalem. However, the church did give birth to many daughters during the Great Reformation. The so-called Great Reformation, this is when the Catholic Church gave birth to her many daughters. Her many daughters are the thousands of different Christian denominations, mostly Protestant denominations. Just think of what has happened since that Great Reformation. Think of all the scores of incompatible doctrine and theologies that make up Christianity today. They are simply incompatible with one another. It's as if these different denominations are preaching and teaching and living according to a very different gospel from a church that is just down the street from them. So all of these Protestant denominations, they are simply daughters of the great prostitute. And they too are prostitutes. Think of, just the abominations that are described as being part of this great prostitute and the beast. Abominations and blasphemies. Think of the martyrs. Think of the Christians and the people that the Catholic Church has killed. Think of going all the way back to the time of Constantine, for this was the time when the Catholic Church first began persecuting and killing believers, killing people who did not conform to the Catholic Church beliefs. Think of the Christians who were first killed during the time of Constantine. Well, this was a time period when the church began fornicating with kings. They partnered with Constantine, and the church compromised itself, and it married itself to paganism, adopting traditions that were pagan. Consider that the Sabbath was changed from the seventh day of the week to the first day of the week. Consider that the canon was created, and in doing so eliminated much of God's written word. Consider that the date for December 25th was chosen to celebrate the birth of Christ, even though the leaders of the church knew without doubt, without any question whatsoever, that he could not have been born in December, but they compromised. And they agreed with Constantine to celebrate the birth of Christ on December 25th because it coincided with one of the most holy days for pagans, that being winter solstice. And so we see that the church began with Constantine to fornicate with the kings of the earth, and this has continued on down through the centuries. Think of the sexual immorality in the church, in the Catholic Church. Think of all the children down through the centuries that had been abused. Think of the priests and the popes who have had extramarital affairs, who have had mistresses, who have, they've had affairs that resulted in the birth of children that were nothing more than bastards. They were illegitimate children, or I should say, they were illegitimate children of these popes. Think of the people who have been killed, that this fits with the Catholic Church being a great prostitute, drunk with the blood of the martyrs. Sexual immorality. Think about in Canada, just one country, how the Catholic Church took the native children from their parents, forced them into Catholic schools, and one of the things they did was try to beat the Indian out of them. This is a term that was used. Many of these children died, and the parents were never told that the children died or how they died. The parents simply lost their children. And it was the Catholic Church that did this. Think of the Spanish Inquisitions. The Catholic Church has committed abominations, has committed blasphemies. Think of indulgences. Consider how the Catholic Church turned Christ into a trade with indulgences. This idea that you could give money to the church, and if you paid these indulgences, you could reduce the amount of time that a deceased loved one would spend in purgatory. Well, this is blasphemy. It's an abomination. Changing the Sabbath from the seventh day of the week to the first is an abomination. So the Catholic Church fits perfectly with all of the criteria that we are given. Consider also that Peter himself, in his first epistle, writes that he is in Babylon, and at the time he was in Rome. Now, there are those Christians who say that, no, this is not the case. Jerusalem is the great prostitute. And when Peter said he was in Babylon, he was actually talking about Jerusalem. Excuse me. Well, this is a lie, an easily disproved lie. Those dispensationalists who say that Peter never left Israel and that none of the apostles who walked with Christ left Israel, well, this is a lie from the pit of hell. We are even told in the book of Acts that Peter said that he was to be an apostle to the Gentiles. We have the early church fathers, people writing from the first and the second century and the third century, stating without doubt that Peter was in Rome and he was crucified there on a cross upside down. So those Christians who say that Peter never left Israel and therefore could not be talking about Rome, well, they are simply living in denial. Peter was in Rome. It was in Rome that Peter was crucified. And when he writes from Rome, he states that he is in Babylon. He is talking about spiritual Babylon, Rome being spiritual Babylon. So this is clearly identifying Rome as being mystery Babylon that John is speaking of. So you see, my brothers and sisters, there really is little doubt that the Catholic Church is this great prostitute. And it's important to understand this. And it's also important to understand that the scriptures do not tell us that the Antichrist or the beast or false prophet will come from the great prostitute. No, that's the mistake that many Christians are making. I will put to you, though, that they do come from one of her daughters. I say this because we are told that the beast grows to hate the great prostitute. The beast works with the great prostitute for a period of time, but grows to hate her and ends up destroying her. Therefore, it makes no sense that the Antichrist or the false prophet would come from the great prostitute if the beast ends up destroying her. It does follow, and it does make sense, though, that the beast would do this if he makes a new partnership, if he begins working with not the great prostitute, but rather with one of her daughters, who are one of the many Protestant denominations. And I believe this is going to be the case, that the Antichrist, the false prophet, and the beast are going to rise out of Protestantism, and they are going to be using the Protestant Bible of 66 books, which is the easiest of all the Bibles to deceive people with, because it lacks so much of our Father's inspired written word. Just look at what's going on in the world today. Look at how there are so many countries that are becoming nationalists, Christian nationalists. Think of how Germany did this. Think of how the United States is now in the process of creating a Republican Party that is made up of many Christian nationalists who want to eliminate altogether the opposing political party. Well, I believe the Antichrist and the false prophet are going to be doing, or rather coming from, this type of system where church and state are combined, where there is no division of church and state. This is how the Antichrist, the beast, and the false prophet are going to come into power. Now, what about the fact that the church is known for its great wealth? And we're told that the prostitute would be known for its love of luxury and wealth, that it would be adorned in gold, precious gems, and pearls. Well, this is exactly what the Catholic Church is known for. It is known for its great wealth and for its love of money. This is just another obvious and clear characteristic of the Catholic Church and the great prostitute. The Catholic Church has always, ever since the time of Constantine, has loved power and wealth. We can see with the cup itself, the description of this golden cup, that this fits with the Catholic Church. Think of the crown that the Pope wears. Think of the authority that the Pope claims to have, to be the bigger of earth, to be taking the place of Christ himself, standing in for Christ until he returns. Think of all the things that the Catholic Church is known for. Think of the fact that it even uses demons and ghouls. It has sculptures of these demons in many of its cathedrals. Now, for my final point on the Catholic Church, I'd like to point to something that one of the popes did. This was back just, around the time of the so-called Great Reformation. It was in the 1500s. What we see is that Pope Gregory XIII introduced a new calendar. He introduced and created what is known today as the Gregorian calendar. It has been adopted by every country in the world except for 5 or 6 that have rejected the Gregorian calendar. So this Pope changed the way in which we keep track of days, weeks, months, and years. Changed the way that we keep track of time. This is one way that the Catholic Church rules over the many peoples, nations, and tongues of the world, ruling over them by way of this calendar. A calendar that is not of God, a calendar that God did not ordain or bless. Changing the calendar as he did. Well, this is clear evidence that the Catholic Church is the great prostitute. And there's even more evidence of this by the fact that this Pope, Pope Gregory XIII, used as an image in his seal the image of a dragon. So the dragon, this dragon that is described in Revelation as at one point sweeping away 1/3 of the stars, and then at another point is described as trying to drown the bride of Christ with the waters that flow from his mouth. This very same dragon is the image that we find on the seal of Pope Gregory XIII. This is a way that the Catholic Church continues to rule over the many peoples of the earth by way of this Gregorian calendar. This evil, wicked Pope used as an image on his seal the image of the dragon, clearly pointing to the Catholic Church as being this great prostitute that's described in the book of Revelation. All right, I think that's about enough for this one video. I know there are things that I've neglected to speak on that I wanted to, and so for those things I forgot to mention, I will leave either in the description box or as a comment that I will pin to the top of the comment section. In my next video, I'm going to be looking at who the beast is that the great prostitute sits on, because it's extremely important that not only we identify who the great prostitute is, but also who the beast is that she at one time had authority over and controlled. And when we understand the two, then it becomes, or I should say, we are given a very clear picture of how the Antichrist and the beast and the false prophet are going to come onto the scene and deceive the masses. As always, I look forward to your comments and messages. Till next time, peace and blessings.